Welcome to this guide on using JetEngine's core functions. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to get started with dynamic visibility. But before we do start, let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Paul C from WP Tuts, and I've teamed up with Crocoblock to create a series of tutorials on using dynamic jet plugins like JetEngine and JetSmart filters. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's just hop over now onto my test website and I'll show you how to get started with JetEngine's dynamic visibility tools. Now before we can start using dynamic visibility for widgets and sections, we need to go ahead and enable the feature in JetEngine's available modules. So let's open up the dashboard of our website and see how to do that. Once you've logged into your dashboard, we simply need to head to the JetEngine options and choose the very first entry, JetEngine, and inside there we've got the modules section. And as you can see, there's a lot of different available modules. What we're looking for is the dynamic visibility for widgets and sections. We'll simply enable that, hit save, and that's now become available to us throughout our copy of Elementor. Now that we've enabled the feature, how do we access this in Elementor to be able to start applying conditions to our designs? Again, let's open up our site's dashboard, load up Elementor and check things out. So we'll kick things off inside the template for my header. And let's just select any kind of widget. Doesn't really matter what widget we have selected. To access the options, all we need to do now is go to Advanced, and inside there you'll see we have a new entry called Dynamic Visibility. We can open that up and then we can simply choose to enable it. Once we enable it, we now get all the options that we need to start creating the dynamic visibility based upon loads of different options. Now that we've enabled dynamic visibility, let's start this off with a simple but very common example of how to show or hide things based upon the logged in status of the visitor. For our example, we want to hide this section at the top if the user isn't logged in. These are user only features, so the wishlist, account, and so on. So what I'm going to do is select that widget. I'm going to come over into the advanced section on the left hand side, open up the dynamic visibility and enable that option. Once we do that, we can choose between to show an element or to hide an element based upon a condition, whether it's true or false. So you can see all we have is show or hide. So for this example, we're going to hide it. So then we have the option for the conditions. We can open that up, and inside there we can choose what we want to check against to hide this element. So you can see if we open this up, there are an absolute shed load of great options inside here. This should cover most use cases. So what we're going to do is we just want to check if the user's logged in. So we're going to scroll down and you can see we've got a user section where we can check against various different things. So we're going to say hide this if the user is not logged in. We're going to choose that option. So we're just saying hide this element if this condition is met, user's not logged in. We'll update this, and now we've set that up inside there. So we're going to hop back over to our test page. We're going to refresh this, and you can see that shows up for me because I am currently logged in. Let's open up an incognito window and check the same page out when we're not logged in. There you go. With our incognito window open, you can see we no longer have that section at the top, so we can't do anything. Now, this is a little bit illogical because we now have, if a user isn't logged in, they have no way of logging in. So let's just set up another set of conditions now to show a different element that allows the user to log in. And once they log in, then they'll see those options. So we're going to come back over into our test site. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up the navigator just to give us a little bit of breathing space so we can see what we're doing. So for this one, we're just going to add in a second list. And we're going to add in the icon list. And we're going to just put that above the actual logged in section. Now it doesn't really matter as long as these are kind of stacked in the same place. Doesn't matter which way around they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly delete these and we're just going to put the option to log in. And we're going to change this to a user icon. And we'll check this one so we can see some difference between the two. And I'll just quickly set this up to make sure everything looks the same. And there we go. There's our new login link all set up. So now we just need to apply a condition to this to make sure this only shows up to users that are logged out. So making sure that we've got this selected over on our navigator, just for ease, we're going to come back into advanced again, into dynamic visibility and enable this. And we're going to say show element if condition is met. We're going to add our new condition in and we're just going to come down and we're going to scroll right the way down and we're going to say user is not logged in. Now, it doesn't really matter which way around you set these up. You can see we've got this to show the element if a condition is met, so the user's not logged in. You could just as easily hide the element if the condition is that the user is logged in. They both do exactly the same kind of thing. So now if we hit update on there and we hop over to our test site and we open up, first of all, the incognito window, we'll see over on the right hand side, we now have the login option. Whereas if we come back to our test site and just refresh the page, we'll see we still have our logged in information. So we've now set up some conditions to show based upon whether the user's logged in or logged out. Really simple setup, but the kind of thing you're going to find you'll do quite a lot when working with more dynamic websites. Now we've taken a look at some of the basics. Let's take a look at how we can do something a little more useful. Let's look at how we could offer our logged in user a way to edit the content they've added to the website while disabling that privilege for any content not associated with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit these listing items and we're going to add in a button that's only going to be available to the user who is logged in and has access to those particular properties. They're properties that they've added to the database. So to do that, back into the dashboard, into JetEngine, and we're going to open up the listings option. For the listing that we want to edit, it's the property listing. So we're going to open this up with Elementor. What we're going to do is we're going to use the dynamic link. Now, I'm not going to worry about linking this up to an actual property to edit it and so on. I just want to show you how you can use the conditions. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a search for dynamic. And we're going to just drop in the option for a dynamic link and we'll just position that roughly where I want. Open up the navigator and just position that right at the bottom. And there we go. So we've now added that in. Let's just quickly add a little bit of spacing around this. We're going to just come over, add in a little bit of padding and so on, margins I should say, 20 at the right, at the left, 20 at the bottom, gives a bit of breathing space. And now what we're going to do is we're going to change this to edit property details. And we'll just say that this is going to add query arguments, and this is kind of how you'd set the link up. You can style this however you want to, but what we're interested in is hopping over into the advanced options, into our dynamic visibility again, and enabling this. So now we can just choose when this is going to show. So we leave this set as show element if condition is met, and we're going to add our first condition in. And from here, we're going to just choose the option to check if this is the post author. So we can come in, scroll right the way down until we get the option that says is current post author. We choose that option. So now that will show that if I'm the author of any particular post, in this case properties. However, that doesn't then check to see if it's a specific user level. So in other words, we wouldn't want this to kind of show up potentially to anybody. We want to make sure that you have to be of a certain level or above to be able to access it, as well as be logged in and be the current author. So this is how we can stack those conditions on top of each other. So we're going to just open this up. And now we can choose a second option, so we can say that the user role is a certain level. So we can scroll down and we can say the user role is, and we can check that option. And then you can add the user roles you want in. So we can say administrator, editor, author, contributor, whatever level or levels you've assigned to be able to create and add content in this example. So for ease, I'm just going to say this is going to be administrator and also editor. We're not going to worry about anybody else. So now we've got two conditions stacked on top of each other. You have the option now for the relationship between these two. So you can say, is the current post author the currently logged in user, and is the user role set to either an administrator or an author, or an editor, I should say, sorry. You can set that to be and or. So if you set it to and, it has to meet both of those criteria. If you set it to or, it just has to meet one of those criteria. So in our example, we're going to use the option for and. Basically, we're saying that we want the current author to be the currently logged in user, and the user role is set to be either administrator or editor. That way, we're doing two checks to make sure that they can get access to this information. So let's just update this listing. So I've opened up our listing page, I've refreshed, and as you can see, the 4 properties all have the edit property details because these are ones that are associated with my account where I'm logged in. You can see the alter ego property doesn't have that option because that's created by a different user, in this case, a user called alter ego. So I can't edit that property, but I can edit any of the ones that I've created. If we open our incognito window again, and we just go into all properties, and we take a look at the property listings, because I'm logged out, I'm not logged in as any user, you can see the option to edit the property details is completely gone. So we're doing that checking to make sure that we are logged in user, we have the right access, and we are of the right user role before we can see anything. If we're not logged in, we don't have access, we don't see anything at all. So this is a great way of being able to take different conditions, stack them on top of each other, and create a much more feature-rich user experience for people that are logged in, for administrators, editors, and those kinds of things on your site. Really cool how we can stack these things up together. Let's take some of the key things we've learned in the first parts of this guide and look at a more comprehensive example, a membership type site design. The first thing we'll need to do is create a form with JetEngine that allows us to let users register and give them a specific user role. Now, if you're already familiar with building user registration forms, well, feel free to use the timestamps in the description to skip to the next section where I'll show you how to set up the restrictions on the content. Now, before we start taking a look, you could take this process one step further than I'll demonstrate in this video by adding in PayPal payment options for paid memberships. Now, while I won't be covering that in this guide, check the link out in the description to a video showing you how to add PayPal payments to your JetEngine forms. So the first part of this process now revolves around us creating the form for registration. I've already gone ahead and used a free plugin called User Role Editor to create a new user role called Member. Once that's done, we can now reference that when we set up the registration process. So all we need to do is come into JetEngine and choose the Forms option. Now, if you haven't enabled this, all you're going to need to do is go to JetEngine first of all and scroll through until you find the Forms entry, flick the switch on there, hit Save, and you'll have that option for Forms in the left-hand section. So once we're inside there, we can give this a new form. So we're going to add new. And from there, we're going to give this a name. And what I'm going to do is call this Register New User, role-based, so we know it's based upon a user role. Once we do that, you can see we've got the Post ID and the Submit button. The form fields are automatically generated alongside this first action, which is to send an email. Well, because we're creating a new user, Post ID is completely irrelevant and not needed, so we can get rid of that completely. And we're going to change the Submit button from the text of Submit to something that makes a little more sense. We're going to change that to Register. Apply those changes, and that's that section done. Next up, if we take a look at the post submit actions, you can see this is set to send email. What we're going to do is we're going to change that before we start creating the fields, and I'll show you why now. Let's change this from send email and set this to register new user. Once we do that, you can see this opens up a set of different options. These are how we're going to map things to this new user. As you can see, user login, email, and password fields can't be empty. Basically, most of the other things can be. But what we're going to do is we're going to just fill everything out on here so it makes a little bit more sense. And then if we want to later on, we could reference the first name, those kinds of things. Okay, so with that being done, let's come up now to create those fields. So let's add our first field in. And I'm not going to take you through every single one of these because I'm pretty sure you can kind of see what I'm going to do with it. But I will show you the most important ones. So the field name, the first one, we're going to open that up to edit it. First of all, we can choose the type, so we're going to set that to be text because this is going to be the username. Field type of text is perfectly fine, but if we expand that, you can see we have some other options inside here. And this is how we can kind of do some checking to make sure that when we want an email or a password or something, the form field is handled correctly, and also error checking is carried out against that to make sure it is matching the right kind of data being input. For this example, text is perfectly fine. I'm going to change the field name to user underscore name. The label, we're just going to put in username. Description, I'm going to leave that as it is, but you could drop something in there if you wanted to. We're going to set this to be required because we are going to need a username when someone creates a new registration. Set input mask, we don't need to worry about that. Placeholder, we can drop in username in there if we want to as well, and that'll put a placeholder inside the form field itself. We're going to leave things like minimum length and so on. It's not really relevant. And we're also going to set this field visibility for all because obviously we want to make this registration open, so people need to see all these fields. We'll hit apply changes on there. Next up, we're going to add our email field in. So I'm going to add a new field, position that where I want, and do the same kind of thing again. Text is fine. All we're going to do is change the field type this time to email, so we can do that error check we just talked about. And we're going to change the name of this, and we're just going to put this user underscore email. Label, user email. Set is required, and everything else can be left pretty much as it is. We'll apply the changes on there. And I'm just going to show you the password ones, then everything else is just basically just normal text fields. So what we're going to add another one in and reposition this. We'll just set text is fine. Text, change that to password. We're just going to call this password. Actually, call this user password, I should say. So user underscore password. Label, password. Required, absolutely. We want to make sure they put that in there, and we're going to apply the changes, and then we're going to create another field that's pretty much exactly the same. So we can duplicate that, and we're just going to quickly rename this one. So we're going to change this to user password repeat, or set to check, user password check, just so we can compare those two values to make sure that everything is fine. I'm going to change label to password repeat password. There we go. Okay, apply the changes on there. So I'm going to quickly just add in the first name, last name, and the URL, so you don't have to watch me doing that. Okay, so there's all the fields set up. There is one thing I do want to do that's quite useful. You don't have to do this, but it is something useful if you're dealing with registration. Let's open up the password. And what we're going to do inside there is we're going to set the minimum length to be 8 characters. We'll apply the changes, and we'll do exactly the same then on the check option. Minimum length of 8 characters, and apply our changes. This just means that people can't use any kind of password that's under 8 letters, characters, numeric characters, whatever you kind of want. Just adds a little level of security to what you're doing. Okay, so now that we've created the form fields, the next thing we need to do is handle what happens afterwards. So we've set up, first of all, the type is going to be register new user, and that's exactly what we want here. We're going to add a couple more in afterwards, but this is the key, most important one. So once we've done that, we now just simply need to map the fields to the fields we just created. So you can see user login, we're going to choose username, and these are all going to be in order now anyway. User email, user password, confirm password, first name, last name, and URL. Simple as that. Next up, we have the user role. Now, if you haven't created a new user role, you're only going to see the standard ones, things like editors, author, contributor, and subscriber. You notice administrator isn't available inside here. You can't set, or someone can't register and be set as an administrator for security purposes. However, you will see that there's a new entry inside there called member, which basically is just a duplicate of subscriber, but it allows me to have a dedicated user role. Don't have to follow along with this. It's entirely up to you. It's just quite useful for organization purposes. So we're going to set that to be member. And then you can see we've got user meta. Now this, at this point, for what we're doing, registering a new user, we don't need to worry about. This is only if you wanted to have pre-filled out forms. To have that, you need to have the user logged in, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a registration form. So we'll leave all those blank. Then we can just choose what happens after someone registers. Do you want to log in the user after registration, so therefore they would immediately be logged in and available to access whatever logged in features that are available? For this example, we're going to say we do. However, up to you if you don't want to do that. We're not going to worry about this registered user ID data. We don't need to pass anything over. We're going to leave that as it is. So we'll hit apply changes on there. So that's our first post submit action completed. We could leave it there if we want to, but we want to make this as user-friendly as possible. So the next thing I want to do is to send an email. And this is going to be sending an email through to whoever you want. You might want to notify the admin of the site, the user themselves, whatever you want to do. So we'll add a new notification. Send email is perfectly fine. And then we can just quickly pre-fill all this out. So send email is fine. Who do you want to email? Well, you can send it to the administrator if you wanted to, but we're going to send this to the email from the submitted form field, which would be the new registrant. From field, you can set that up if you want to any of the fields you have inside here. So we're going to say from, put username in it, doesn't really matter too much. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to simply drop in a a subject field. We're going to drop inside there your registration and then just first name. And that's just taken from the content down below, these little macros that we can use, which is just dynamic data being pulled over from the form field itself. Hope that makes sense. You can then drop in your email, so we can just put in no@email.com inside there, but obviously you'd put your actual email address in. And then you can choose the format, whether you want this to be HTML or plain text. Up to you what you want to do. Then finally, we can just put in whatever we want to include in the email message itself, and we can use any of these macros to pass over any of the form data from our form fields we've just created. I've already done something inside there, so I'm just simply going to drop that in, and you can see this is just using some of those and also using plain text like username, email. So it kind of just gives an email that makes a little bit more sense to someone. Once we finish with the details, we can hit apply changes. And now if we want to add any more actions, we can do that. So we're going to add one more just to redirect the user to somewhere after they complete their registration. So we'll just open this up, and you can see we can change this now from send email, and we'll set this to be redirect to page. Once we choose that option for redirect to page, we can now choose from 3 different options on how to deal with the redirect. You can see we've got a static page, a custom URL, or to go back to the current page. You can also pass over URL query values if you want to from any of your form elements, obviously avoiding things like your password and so on for general purposes. And you can also use the hash inside to redirect the URL. So there's lots of different options. What we're going to do though is keep this really simple and say we want to go to a static page, and then we can choose whatever page you want. Now I've already gone ahead and created just a registration complete page. You'd obviously fill out a little bit more information on there, a bit more useful. I just want to show you for demonstration purposes. So select the page and we're just going to choose registration completed. If you want to pass over any queries or arguments via the URL, you can do that by pulling any of the data from any of the form fields we've created. Obviously, I would avoid the things like your password and so on. You can also add a hash to the redirect URL if you want to use that particular kind of technology. We're keeping this really simple though. Let's hit apply changes on there. So we've now created our form, set it up to register a new user with a certain user role, send the email, redirect to the page once that's completed. So we'll hit update on there. We've now created our form. So let's test that out before we go any further. Now, to be able to test our form out, we need to create a page to insert our registration form in. So we're going to click on add new for pages. And inside there, we're just going to call this registration. And we'll just publish that and we'll edit it with Elementor. And then we're going to use one of Crocoblock JetEngine's widgets. So we're going to do a search for form. And we'll drag our form onto the page and we'll just select our form. So we're going to do a search for registration. And there's our register new user. Now what we can do is we can just tidy this page up to make it a little bit more interesting. So first of all, let's just remove this pointless heading and we'll adjust this spacing, set this to 800 wide. Just a little bit of space above and below, and just make things look just a little bit nicer. There we go. So now let's just save our form. Let's just quickly preview this to make sure everything is looking okay. And there we go, there's our form. Okay, so let's just take now our dynamic visibility and start to create something that would make a lot more sense. We don't want people that are already logged in to be able to register. So, unless of course they're an admin and they want to register someone else. Let me just show you how we can do things like that. This is really easy and a good example of how you can start to use these visibility options. Let's just quickly go over and put a heading inside there. And we'll just call this register new user. And we'll just set some conditions up on here. So the first thing we're going to do is just select this form element. I'm going to leave the heading as it is. That's perfectly fine. Select this form element, come to advanced, and we're going to come into our dynamic visibility. We'll enable that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to set this up with a couple of conditions. So what we want to do is basically hide this if conditions aren't going to be met. So let's just change this to hide element if condition is met. So we're going to say that if the user is logged in, they don't see this registration form. So we're going to open that up and we're going to just scroll down and you see user is logged in. So basically we're just saying that if the user is logged in, they can't access this form. So let's update that and let's just preview things now where I am logged in. So if we preview this, we get no form, nothing is there. But what about if we want this to be, I'm an administrator, I am logged in, so I'm an admin, and I want to have access to the form so I can actually go ahead and register people. But anybody else that has a different user role and is logged in can't see it, or anybody that isn't logged in can't see it. So what we can do is we can add another condition inside there. So we're going to change this condition and we're going to just come down and we're going to choose the option that just says that user role is not. Because remember, we're working with hiding this element. So if the user role is not an admin, and then we've got the relation. In other words, do we want these two conditions to be met together, or do we want them to be separate to each other? So one or the other condition has to be correct for this to be hidden. We want to set this to and, because we're basically saying the user log has to be logged in and their user role is not an administrator for this to be hidden. So now if we check this out and take a look, you can see this is what we see when we're logged in, register a new user, and we can scroll down, we can register a user. The same thing goes if we're not logged in. So if we simply open up a new incognito window, and we'll just resize that a little bit. There we go. And I'll just paste in the link. You can see I'm not logged in and I get access to register as a new user and I can fill out all my relevant details. So there's one final thing I want to do on here. So anybody that accesses this page that doesn't see the form knows something's going on, because at the moment we just end up with a blank page. So what we need to do is just simply set up another condition. So we're just going to drag a text area inside here and we're just going to put a message inside there. There we go. We're just simply going to add this message in, and because we set the condition to show and hide on the form itself, we can now set up different conditions on any other element inside here. So for this example, we'll select this little pop-up message, come into advanced and into our dynamic visibility, enable dynamic visibility, and now we can set up our condition to show or hide that. So let's just do that. Let's just set our conditions. So you can say show this element if a condition is met. So we're going to say, first of all, we're going to show this if a user is logged in. And we're also going to set the and up. We're going to set another one inside there, and condition, we're going to just say the user role is not administrator. We'll update that and just test that out. So let's preview this. So as you can see, because I'm an admin and I've got access to this, I've got the register new user, the register new user form. I don't have that error message. So everything is working as it should do. Okay, so let's test our new form out. I've opened up an incognito window. I'm going to fill out my details and I'm going to register as a new user. We'll check everything works as it should do, and then we'll take a look at what happens when a new user registers, check to see that they're given the correct user level as we set up with our new registration form. Okay, so there's all my information all filled out. And I'm going to hit register, and once you've done that, you can see registration is complete. So now that's registered it as we'd expect. Now if we hop back over into the dashboard, when I'm logged in as an admin, we should find out if everything has gone as we expect. And there we go. If we look in the admin, you can see there's alter ego. If we take a look, their role is set as member. So that's the registration form completed. We've gone ahead and set everything up. They've been registered. They've also been set to be the right user role. So now we can take a look at how we can show and hide content on a page to someone that has the correct user roles in a form of membership kind of setup. Okay, now we've got through the process of building the registration form, we can now get stuck into building the basic conditions we need to check for the user's logged in status as well as their user roles. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, I've created a page that's going to contain the locked content. So all we're going to do is build this up and then set the visibility conditions to check for various different things. So the first thing we're going to do is just create the content for our page that the members would see. So we're going to start off with a simple heading, and I'll just drop inside there what I want this to be, and we'll do the same thing underneath. We'll just grab and drop a text editor inside there, and we'll just select some basic text to drop in there as well. Okay, so next thing I want to do is drop the actual content, and for this we're going to use a listing, because we're going to basically say this is going to be specific properties that only particular members can get access to. So we'll just choose the listing we're going to do. So we'll just choose our property listing. And we'll choose, there we go. So this is going to list our properties in this particular example. So that's the content of our page setup. So now we need to set the conditions on who and how people can see this. Now we can set this in a couple of ways, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire block because I want to hide this if they don't meet the conditions and show this if they do. I don't want to have to set it on each individual widget. So we'll select the entire section, come into advanced, into our dynamic visibility, enable that, and now we can set up the condition that we want it to meet. So how do we want to go about doing that? Well, we've got lots of different ways in which we could approach this, but we're going to keep this pretty simple and straightforward, and you can get as comprehensive as you want with this. So the first thing we're going to say is we're going to say show this element if the condition is met. So the first thing we want to do is to check, first of all, to ensure that they are actually logged in. Otherwise, you don't want people that are logged out to be able to access this content. So we'll say, scroll down and say user is logged in. And there we go. So now you have to be logged in. That's the first part of the condition. The second one is we're going to check that they have the specific user role that will get access to this. So we're going to say add another item, open this up, and we'll scroll down and we're going to say the user role is. And from there, we're going to set this to be our member role, which is the role that we have given access to, the role we created. We'll use that registration form. We'll open that up and you can see member is available inside there. And we're also going to do the same thing and set this for administrator, because obviously we want to let admins to be able to access the content of this so they can check everything works. They have full access and members have access to it. Anybody that falls outside those roles won't see anything. Then again, we've got the relation. Well, we want this to be both of these. We want you to check that they are logged in and they are an administrator or a member. So and is perfectly fine. Hit publish on there, and that's the first set of conditions set up. But obviously we need to set some kind of error message up if people are looking to access this page and they don't have access to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another section underneath. I'm going to keep this really simple like we did before. So we're just going to select that, make a bit of space like I've done before, and we're going to just drop in some information. So we'll grab a heading and drop that inside there. And we'll also grab a text area and we'll drop that inside there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just put the error message and say, oops, looks like you don't have access to this. And once we've done that, we want to make the second section a little bit more usable. So I'm going to remove what's in there and we're going to drop a little message like this in. This just gives a nice way of telling people what they need to do. If they need to register, they can register, or they can log in. So we just give links to the relevant pages inside there. So now we need to set the condition up for this second section, because obviously this only needs to show up if people are meeting the right criteria for that. So what we're going to do is select this entire section. What we're going to do is then come over to advanced, into our dynamic visibility, open up the enable, and inside there we can now say show element if condition is met and set our condition. So we can choose this and we can say we want this to show up if a user role is not, and then we can just set that to be administrator or member. Now we don't need to worry about putting the user is logged in, because they would have to be logged in to check these roles. So now we can hit update on there, and we now have our conditions set up to show and hide the various different sections. So let's just test this out. I'm logged in as an admin, so I can click and I can go and take a look, and there's my member only properties, and I don't see the error message underneath. So that's all working perfectly fine. Now I've opened up an incognito window. This is the one we just used to register my alter ego. We're going to refresh, go to the page now, and you can see I can see those properties on there because I am set as a member. That's my user role. But let me go and change that user role to something like subscriber or editor, and we'll refresh the page and come back and take a look at what happens when the criteria for access to this is not being met. So let's just change alter ego's role. So at the moment, it's set to be a member. We're going to change that to be subscriber. We'll simply update those user details, and then we'll take a look back on our incognito window. Okay, so let's just refresh this page, and we should find, oops, looks like you don't have access to this content, and now I can either log in if I'm not logged in already, or I can register. So there's some information there. And if you want to get more comprehensive with this and set different conditions up for whether someone's logged in, they don't have the right access level, all those kinds of things, you can get as creative as you want here. But these are all good, solid examples of how you can take these simple tools and start to create much more user-friendly sites where you can control exactly what users can see, what they can't see, different access levels. Really, really useful. Now, while I've covered a lot of ground in this guide, it still only scratches the surface of what can be achieved with dynamic visibility options in JetEngine. I would encourage you to take a little time to experiment with them and unlock their true potential. Now, as always, all of the applicable links are in the description below, and if you found the video useful, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button to be notified as soon as new videos in the A to Z series are released. My name is Paul C, and until next time, take care.